The brand on Alara's wrist was a circle of dead white scar tissue, a permanent declaration of her worthlessness. It was the traitor's mark, seared into her skin the day they had dragged her father to the headsman's block. They had taken everything: her family, her name, her future. All that remained was the cold. It was a constant companion, seeping into her bones from the damp stone floors of the scullery, a chill that no fire could ever truly banish. She was a ghost in the Frost King's fortress, a whisper of a girl with downcast eyes and hands raw from lye soap. They called him the Frost King, the Alpha King Kalin, a name spoken in hushed, fearful tones. He was a creature of myth as much as a man, a ruler of centuries whose heart was said to be as frozen as the northern wastes he commanded. Ilara had never seen him. To her, he was just another shadow in a world made of them. Her life was a simple, brutal rhythm: wake before dawn, work until her back screamed, sleep on a thin straw pallet, and try not to remember the warmth of a life before the brand. Some days the scar ached with a phantom cold, a deeper chill than the winter air. It was a reminder. You are nothing. You are the daughter of a traitor. You deserve this. The words were not her own, but they had been repeated so often they had become a part of her, woven into the very fiber of her being. She believed them. It was easier than hoping for anything else. Today, the ache was particularly sharp. A blizzard raged outside, throwing sheets of snow against the narrow scullery window. Every gust of wind seemed to slice through the cracks in the stone, a physical assault. Alara plunged her hands back into the greasy, lukewarm water, the sting of familiar punishment. Her stomach twisted with a hunger so deep it had become a dull, constant presence. Her portion of bread that morning had been smaller than usual, and she had given half of it to Leah, a younger girl whose cough had been getting worse. Seeing the gratitude in Leah's wide, frightened eyes had been worth the gnawing emptiness. It was a small act of defiance. They could brand her, starve her, work her to the bone, but they could not extinguish that last stubborn ember of kindness. It was all she had left of the girl she had been. The scullery overseer, a sour-faced woman named Marta, shoved a wooden bucket into her hands. The western courtyard needs clearing. The drift is blocking the passage to the kennels. Alara's heart sank. The western courtyard was a wind tunnel, exposed and merciless. No one else wanted the duty. Of course, it fell to her. Yes, Marta. The words were barely a whisper. And be quick about it. The woman sneered, her eyes flicking to the brand on Alara's wrist. We don't pay traitors to stand idle. Alara flinched but said nothing. She pulled her thin cloak tighter, took the heavy wooden shovel, and pushed the door open. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Snow, sharp and granular, stung her cheeks. Each step was a battle against the storm and the rising drifts. The world was a churning vortex of white and gray, the fortress walls dissolving into the blizzard. She was so alone out here. The thought came unbidden, sharp as a shard of ice. She had always been alone, even in a crowd. The brand ensured it. It was a wall between her and the world, more solid than the stone of the castle. She began to shovel, her movements clumsy, her arms already aching. The wood of the shovel was slick with ice, and her threadbare gloves were soaked through in moments. The cold was no longer just on her skin, it was inside her, a living thing coiling in her gut. Her fingers went numb, then her toes. A dangerous lethargy began to creep over her. The snow was so soft, so quiet. It would be so easy to just lie down, to rest. No. The word was a silent scream in her mind. She thought of Leah's cough. She thought of the promise she had made to her mother's memory, to survive. She forced her frozen fingers to tighten on the shovel and kept working, her breaths coming in ragged white plumes. But the storm was relentless. A powerful gust knocked her off balance and she fell, her head striking the stone path hidden beneath the snow. The world tilted, the swirling white dissolving into black. The ache in her brand flared, a final searing spike of cold, and then there was nothing. Silence. A profound, echoing silence that was deeper than the muffling snow. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Heavy and sure, crunching through the deep drift. They stopped beside her. A shadow fell over her, blocking out the gray light of the storm. She was dreaming. She had to be. Because the man who knelt beside her was not real. He was a creature from a story, beautiful in the way a glacier was beautiful, vast, ancient, and merciless. His hair was the color of winter frost, and his eyes were the pale, piercing blue of a frozen sky. He was massive, his shoulders broad enough to block out the world, wrapped in dark furs that seemed to drink the light. The Alpha King, Kalen. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her mind. She tried to move, to scramble away, but her limbs would not obey. He did not look at her face. His gaze was fixed on her wrist, where her glove had fallen away, exposing the ugly white scar to the storm. The traitor's mark. This was it. He would see it. He would know what she was. He would cast her out. Or worse. Her life, already so small and fragile, was over. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow, the harsh command, the end. It did not come. Instead, she felt a touch. Fingers, shockingly cold, brushed against her skin, not with revulsion, but with a strange, hesitant curiosity. He traced the outline of the brand, his touch sending a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. It was like lightning, a sudden, inexplicable spark of heat in the frozen landscape of her body. Her eyes fluttered open. He was looking at her now, his expression unreadable, a mask of ice. But his eyes? There was something in their depths. Not pity, not anger, confusion. A flicker of something that looked almost like recognition. Before she could process it, he was moving. He slid one powerful arm beneath her knees and another behind her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The world spun, a dizzying swirl of fur and frost and the faint, clean scent of pine and winter. He held her against his chest. His body was like a block of ice, yet where she was pressed against him, a frantic, impossible warmth began to bloom deep inside her. Guards appeared from the swirling snow, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Your Majesty?" one of them ventured, his voice tight with alarm. The king did not look at him. His pale eyes were on Alara's face. "The girl is freezing," he said, his voice a low rumble, deep as thunder but soft as snowfall. "Find Marta. Tell her that her duties in the scullery are finished, permanently." He started walking, carrying her away from the courtyard, away from the storm. He moved with an unnerving grace, his long strides eating up the ground. Alara was pressed against the solid wall of his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart beneath layers of wool and fur. It was the only warmth in the world. She felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she had fallen out of her own life and into someone else's dream. The Frost King was carrying her, the branded traitor. It made no sense. He carried her through corridors she had only ever scrubbed, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Servants and guards flattened themselves against the walls, their eyes wide with astonishment. No one dared to speak. The only sounds were the king's measured footsteps and the howl of the wind outside. He did not take her back to the servants' quarters. He ascended a grand staircase, entering a part of the fortress she had never been allowed to see. The air here was different, warmer, scented with beeswax and drying herbs. He pushed open a heavy oak door and carried her into a vast chamber dominated by a four-poster bed and a roaring fireplace. Gently, he laid her down on the velvet coverlet. The fabric was sinfully soft against her frozen skin. For a moment, his hands lingered, his gaze searching her face. The intensity of it was overwhelming. It felt as if he were seeing not just her, but into her, past the grime and the fear and the brand, to something buried so deep she had forgotten it was there. Then he straightened up, and the mask of ice slammed back into place. He turned away, his broad back a formidable wall. "A physician will be here shortly," he stated, his voice devoid of the softness she had imagined moments before. "You will remain here." He strode to the door without a backward glance. He paused, his hand on the iron latch. "Do not leave this room." It was not a request. It was an absolute command. Then he was gone, the heavy door closing with a final, definitive thud. Ilara was left alone in the opulent room, swallowed by a bed large enough to hold 10 of her, the warmth from the fire a confusing caress on her skin. She stared at the closed door, her mind reeling. The Frost King had saved her. And he had touched her brand not with disgust, but with a terrifying, unreadable focus. A tiny, treacherous seed of hope, something she had not felt in years, began to sprout in the frozen wasteland of her heart. It was the most frightening feeling of all. The physician was a kind, elderly man with gentle hands. He treated her for frostbite, clucking his tongue at the state of her worn boots and thin clothes. He gave her a warm, sweet broth that sent life flooding back into her limbs, and a sleeping draught that promised a dreamless night. Ilara drank it obediently, her mind still struggling to make sense of what had happened. She was in the king's own wing of the castle. She was being cared for. Marta was gone. She drifted off to sleep wrapped in the softest wool blankets she had ever felt, the scent of pine and winter clinging to them. It was his scent. For the first time in a decade, she slept without shivering. When she awoke, the storm had passed. Pale morning light filtered through the tall leaded glass windows. She was alone. A fresh set of clothes, a simple but warm woolen dress, clean stockings, and soft leather slippers, was laid out on a chair by the fire. She washed her face in a basin of warm water left on the vanity, her movements slow and tentative, as if she expected to be thrown out at any moment. As she pulled on the dress, she caught her reflection in the silver-backed mirror. The grime was gone, and the warmth had brought a faint flush to her cheeks. She looked less like a ghost. She looked almost real. But the brand was still there, a stark, ugly white against the new life in her skin. A permanent stain. A soft knock on the door made her jump. It opened to reveal the king. He was dressed not in furs but in a simple black tunic and trousers that did nothing to diminish his intimidating presence. In the clear light of day, he seemed even larger, colder. The warmth she had imagined was gone, replaced by a rigid, unyielding control. He did not enter the room fully but stood in the doorway, his pale eyes sweeping over her. "You are recovered," he stated. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Thank you." He gave a short, dismissive nod. His gaze was distant, his jaw tight. "The fates have a cruel sense of humor," he said, the words clipped and harsh. "It seems that you, the girl with the traitor's mark, are my mate." The words hit her like a physical blow. Mate. The sacred, unbreakable bond between wolves. It was impossible. He was the Alpha King. She was nothing, a branded outcast. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the back of the chair for support. "No," she breathed. "It can't be." "I assure you my wolf does not make mistakes," he said, a bitter twist to his lips. "It is a cosmic jest, one I have no intention of honoring." The fragile hope that had taken root in her heart withered and died, turning to ash. Of course, this was the truth of it. He was disgusted, repulsed. She was a stain on him, on his bloodline. The familiar, crushing weight of her own worthlessness settled back over her. "I will make you a bargain," he continued, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You will live here, in this wing. You will have food, warmth, and safety. No one will harm you. In return, you will be my mate, in name only. We will live separate lives under the same roof. There will be no bond. There will be no affection." He said the word as if it were a poison. "I cannot love you. I will not." The finality in his voice was absolute. "I cannot love you." The words echoed in the sudden silence. It should not have hurt. She had never expected kindness, let alone love. But it did hurt. It felt like a door slamming shut on a world she had only just glimpsed. "My bloodline is cursed, girl," he added, a flicker of something dark and painful in his eyes. "For us, love is a death sentence. To feel it is to die. Do you understand? This arrangement is as much for your protection as it is for mine." A curse. He was cursed. The pieces began to click into place. The coldness, the isolation, the name they called him. The Frost King. It wasn't just a title. It was a literal truth. She looked at this powerful, lonely man, and for the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt a strange, aching pang of sympathy. He was as trapped as she was, in a different kind of prison. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze, her own voice quiet but clear. "I understand, Your Majesty." He seemed taken aback by her simple acceptance, by the lack of tears or pleading. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Good. The servants have been instructed. You want for nothing except my company. Stay away from me." He turned and left, closing the door behind him. Alara stood there for a long time, the silence of the room pressing in on her. She was safe. She was warm. She was fed. She should have been grateful. But all she could feel was the profound, echoing loneliness of the king who had just walked away, and the chilling finality of his promise. He would not love her. The days that followed were a strange, liminal existence. Alara lived in the luxurious cage he had provided, a princess in a tower, with an invisible, untouchable king. The servants treated her with a baffling mixture of awe and fear. She was the king's mate, but she was also the traitor's daughter. They left her food on a tray outside her door and scurried away before she could speak to them. The isolation was suffocating. She did not see Kaelin. True to his word, he stayed away. Yet, she felt his presence everywhere. In the warmth of the fire that was always lit before she awoke, in the fresh blankets that appeared on her bed, in the soft, leather-bound books left on her table. They were small, impersonal gestures of care, contradicting his harsh words. He was keeping his side of the bargain, providing for her, but it felt like more than that. It felt like he was watching over her from a distance. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered from her room. The corridors were dark and silent, lit only by slivers of moonlight. She found her way to a vast library, the air thick with the scent of old paper and leather. A single candle burned on a large oak desk. Kaelin was there, slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. He was asleep, a book lying open before him. For the first time, she could look at him without his icy gaze on her. The mask was gone. In sleep, his face was etched with a profound weariness, a loneliness so deep it seemed carved into his very bones. A fine, silvery frost coated the table around his hands, a physical manifestation of the cold that lived inside him. The curse. Her heart ached for him. Without thinking, she moved to the fireplace, added a log, and stoked the embers back to a gentle flame. She found a heavy fur blanket draped over a nearby couch, and carefully, silently, laid it over his broad shoulders. His skin was frigid, even through his tunic. He stirred, a low growl rumbling in his chest, but he did not wake. She retreated back to the shadows, her heart pounding. It was a foolish risk. He had told her to stay away. But she couldn't just leave him there, cold and alone in the dark. From that night on, it became a silent ritual. She would find him in the library or his solar, asleep from exhaustion, the chill of his curse creeping into the room, and she would cover him, stoke his fire, and sometimes leave a cup of hot, calming chamomile tea on the table for when he awoke. She never let him see her. He never acknowledged it. But the nightly visits continued, and slowly, a strange, unspoken conversation began to unfold between them. He started leaving books for her on the library table, histories of the kingdom, tales of old magic, poetry. She would read them and leave a single wildflower, picked from the sheltered castle greenhouse, as a bookmark on a page she particularly liked. One evening she found him awake. He was standing by a window, staring out at the snow-covered mountains, his back to her. She froze, ready to flee. "The tea is good," he said, his voice quiet, not turning around. "You make it just right." Alara's breath caught in her throat. He knew. He had known all along. I am sorry, Your Majesty. I did not mean to disturb you." He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes was muted, replaced by that same weary sadness she had seen when he slept. "You do not disturb me." He paused, his gaze dropping to her wrist, which she instinctively tried to hide. "Tell me about the brand." The question was so direct, so unexpected it stole her voice. No one had ever asked. They had only ever judged. "Why?" she whispered. "Because my wolf chose you," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "It does not choose traitors." So she told him. The words came in a torrent, a decade of silence and shame breaking apart. She told him about her father, a loyal general, a good man. She told him about Lord Valerius, her father's ambitious second-in-command, whose testimony had condemned him. She told him about the trumped-up charges of conspiring with rival pacts, the rushed trial, the day the soldiers came. She spoke of her innocence, a truth she hadn't dared voice in years. He listened, his expression unmoving, his pale eyes never leaving her face. He did not interrupt. He did not question. When she finished, her voice choked with unshed tears. The room was thick with a heavy silence. "Valerius," he said, the name a shard of ice. "He is now the head of my council." A cold dread washed over Alara. I did not know." "I believe you," Kaelin said. The two words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. He believed her. After a decade of being seen as a liar, a traitor, the daughter of a traitor, the most powerful man in the kingdom looked at her and saw the truth. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cold cheek. He took a half step toward her, his hand lifting as if to wipe it away, but he stopped himself. The air between them crackled with a sudden, intense energy. He clenched his fist, and she saw a faint tracery of blue-white frost spread across his knuckles. The curse, responding to the flicker of emotion. He pulled back, the mask of ice returning. "You should go," he said, his voice strained. "It is late." She fled, her heart a wild, frantic drum against her ribs. The boundary he had drawn was eroding. She was seeing the broken man behind the Frost King, and he was seeing the wronged woman behind the brand. And it was terrifying. Because with that seeing, that understanding, came something else. Something warm and dangerous and utterly forbidden. The whispers started soon after. Lord Valerius, a man with a serpent smile and eyes that held a chilling emptiness, had noticed the king's new arrangement. He saw Alara in the halls, dressed in warm wool instead of scullery rags. He saw the way the guards now bowed their heads to her. He saw a threat to his carefully constructed power. The traitor's daughter has bewitched him, the rumors said. She uses dark magic to cloud his mind. The words were poison, spreading through the court, turning the servants' fear into suspicion. Valerius fanned the flames, his voice full of false concern for his ailing king. And Calin was ailing. The more their fragile connection grew, the weaker he became. The frost was no longer just a flicker on his skin. Some mornings he would awaken with his hair rammed in ice. He moved slower, his breathing sometimes shallow. He began to avoid her again, this time with a desperate finality. The pain in his eyes when he looked at her was a physical wound. He was rejecting her to save himself. The rejection was a constant, grinding ache in Alara's chest. Every dawn she would wake with a sliver of hope, and by midday it would be crushed by his cold absence, his closed door. He rejected her at dawn. It was a pattern, a painful truth she had to accept. But by nightfall, the truth would change. She would be in her room, reading one of the books he had left for her, and she would hear it. A sound from the corridor. A soft, desperate scratching at her door. The first time she had frozen in terror. But then she heard the whine, a low, guttural sound of pure longing and pain. It was not Calin the man, it was his wolf, his primal, essential self, drawn to its mate, clawing to get back to the one thing his human mind knew would destroy him. She would press her hand to the wood of the door, her own heart aching in sympathy. "I'm here," she would whisper. The scratching would cease, replaced by a low rumble, almost a purr, and then the heavy sound of him slumping to the floor on the other side of the door. Sometimes he would stay there all night, a silent, tormented guardian. The man rejected her, but the wolf needed her. This paradox was the new shape of her life. She was his poison and his only comfort, his death and his destiny. The tension was a wire pulled taut, humming with a dangerous, beautiful music, and Alara knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that it was about to snap. Valerius saw his chance. The king was weak, isolated, and the court was rife with suspicion. He called a full council meeting in the great hall, demanding the king address the rumors of the traitor witch in their midst. It was a public challenge, a move to corner Calin and expose his weakness. Alara was summoned. She walked into the hall, a sea of hostile faces turning to stare at her. They looked at her brand, their expressions a mixture of hatred and fear. Valerius stood beside the throne, his face a mask of solemn concern. "Your Majesty," Valerius began, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "for the good of the kingdom, you must set this creature aside. Her blood is tainted. Her very presence weakens you, weakens us all. Look at you. The frost is claiming you. She is killing you." Calin sat on the throne, his face pale and drawn. Veins of shimmering ice were visible at his temples, a stark, terrifying map of his curse. He looked from Valerius to Alara, and in his eyes she saw a battle raging. Duty against desire, survival against something that was beginning to feel a lot like love. "She is my mate," Calin said, his voice strained but firm. "She will be treated with respect." "A mate you cannot claim," Valerius countered, his voice rising. "A bond that is poison. I have proof of her continued treachery. Proof that she is not just the daughter of a traitor, but a traitor herself." He produced a forged letter, sealed with her father's crest, detailing a plot to assassinate the king. It was a clumsy, obvious fake, but in the charged atmosphere of the hall, it was enough. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "This is a lie," Alara said, her voice shaking but clear. She looked at Calin, pleading with her eyes. "You know me. You know this is a lie." Calin rose from his throne. He looked at the letter, then at Valerius, and a flicker of his old, terrifying power returned to his eyes. "You dare," he growled, the temperature in the room dropping several degrees. He took a step toward Valerius, and the effort, the surge of emotion, was too much. He stopped, staggering, a sharp cry of pain escaping his lips. He clutched his chest, his breath turning to a cloud of ice crystals. The veins of frost on his skin spread with terrifying speed, covering his neck, his hands, his face. "Kaelin!" Alara screamed, her voice raw with terror. He looked at her, one last agonizing look of regret and longing. "Run!" he choked out, the word freezing on his lips. Then he collapsed. He did not fall like a man. He fell like a statue, hitting the stone floor with a solid crystalline crack. The frost consumed him, encasing him in a tomb of shimmering blue-white ice. He was still, utterly still, his eyes open and staring, frozen in a silent scream. A horrified silence descended on the hall. Lord Valerius was the first to break it. He smiled, a slow, triumphant curl of his lips. "The king is dead," he announced, his voice booming in the stillness. "The witch has killed him. Seize her." The guards hesitated, their eyes wide with shock and fear, looking from the frozen figure of their king to the small, trembling woman he had tried to protect. For a moment, Alara's world ended. The man who had seen her, who had believed her, who had fought his own nature to be near her, was gone. A hollow, cavernous grief ripped through her. Valerius had won. Her life was forfeit. The familiar impulse to flee, to accept her fate, rose up. But then she looked at Kaelin's frozen form, at the agony captured on his face. He had died trying to protect her. He had told her to run, and she refused. "No," she said. The word a quiet stone dropped into a silent pool. The guard stopped. Valerius's smile faltered. A fire ignited in her chest, a rage so pure and hot it burned away the fear, the self-doubt, the years of believing she was worthless. It burned away the cold that had been her constant companion. She was not the traitor's daughter. She was Alara, and she was Kaelin's mate. "I will not let you die," she whispered to the frozen king. She ignored the shouts from Valerius, ignored the advancing guards. She ran to Kaelin's side, falling to her knees on the icy stone beside his body. The cold radiating from him was absolute, a cold that stole heat and life from the very air. It should have killed her to touch him. She didn't care. She placed her hands on his chest, over the still frozen heart. She cradled his icy face, her tears freezing as they fell onto his skin. She poured everything she was into that touch, her grief, her rage, her defiance, and the fierce, forbidden love that had grown in the quiet spaces between them. She remembered the spark she had felt when he first touched her brand in the snow, a flicker of warmth in a world of cold. She clung to that memory, fanning it from an ember into a flame. "You are not the Frost King," she sobbed, pressing her forehead to his. "You are Kaelin, and you will not leave me." Something inside her broke. A dam she never knew existed shattered, and a torrent of power rushed through her veins. It was pure warmth, pure light, pure life. Her hands began to glow, a soft golden radiance that pushed back the shadows in the hall. The light was blinding, terrifying, and beautiful. The brand on her wrist, the mark of her shame, began to burn. But it was not a cold ache. It was a cleansing fire. The dead, white tissue turned red, then gold. The scar tissue flaking away like ash. In its place, a new mark bloomed on her skin. Not a circle of shame, but a swirling, radiant symbol of a sun. The power surged from her, through her hands, and into Kaelin's frozen body. The golden light warred with the blue-white ice of the curse. Steam hissed from his skin as the frost fought a losing battle against the onslaught of life. The ice cracked, splintered, and then melted away, not into water, but into harmless motes of dust that vanished before they hit the floor. The curse, an ancient and powerful thing that had plagued his bloodline for generations, shattered like glass against the raw, untamed force of her love. Kaelin gasped, a ragged, shuddering breath that echoed through the stunned silence of the hall. Color flooded back into his face. His eyes, no longer a frozen sky, were a clear, deep silver gray, and they were fixed on her, on the glowing sun mark on her wrist, on the tears streaming down her face. He reached up, his hand no longer cold, and cupped her cheek. His touch was warm, so wonderfully, impossibly warm. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice rough with disbelief and awe. Behind them, Lord Valerius stared, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. "It's not possible," he stammered. "The curse. It's unbreakable." Kaelin pushed himself to his feet, his strength returning with a visible surge. He was no longer the ailing king. He was power incarnate, radiating an authority that made the very stones tremble. He never took his eyes off Ilara, but his next words were for the entire court. "The curse is broken," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute power. He looked at Valerius, and his gaze was lethal. "And the lies are at an end." He flicked his wrist, and a scroll, held by a leather tie, appeared in his hand. While Lord Valerius was busy spreading rumors, I was investigating the truth of the past. I found this in the sealed archives. The original confession of the man you paid to bear false witness against Ilara's father. He tossed the scroll at Valerius's feet. The traitor's face went white. He had underestimated the king, assuming his physical weakness had dulled his mind. He had been wrong. "You are the traitor, Valerius," Kaelin growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "You destroyed a loyal house for your own ambition. You branded an innocent child, and you tried to murder your king." He turned to the guards, who were now staring at him with pure, unadulterated reverence. "Take him to the dungeons. He will await my judgment." Valerius didn't fight. He simply crumpled. His plot, his power, his entire world dissolving into ruin. The guards dragged him away, his shocked silence more damning than any protest. The hall was utterly still. The nobles and servants stared at Ilara, no longer with hatred or suspicion, but with awe. She was not a witch. She was a miracle, the woman who had saved their king. Kaelin turned back to her, his gaze softening, all the ice gone, leaving only a deep, profound warmth that made her knees weak. He stepped forward, closing the small distance between them, and gently took her hand, lifting it to look at the new, radiant mark on her wrist. "A sun," he whispered, tracing the glowing lines with his thumb, "to melt the frost." He looked into her eyes, and she saw everything there: the centuries of loneliness, the agony of the curse, the terror of falling for her, and the overwhelming, soul-shattering relief of being free. "I was a fool," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent all this time fighting it, pushing you away. I thought love was my death." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the sun mark, then to her palm. "Instead, you became my life." The words she had longed to hear, the truth she had felt in the dark of night when his wolf cried for her, were finally spoken aloud. He pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her in a fierce, possessive embrace. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and winter, but now it was laced with the warmth of a hearth fire. He was real. He was warm. He was hers. "I love you, Ilara," he murmured into her hair. "And it's not going to kill me. It's the only thing that ever made me feel alive." She looked up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The self-doubt, the brand of worthlessness she had carried for so long, was gone, burned away by the sun she now wore on her skin. She was not nothing. She was a queen. She was his. "I love you, Kaelin," she whispered back, and in the great hall of the Frost King, surrounded by his court, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a kiss of fire and ice, of endings and beginnings, a promise of a new world born from the ashes of the old. The curse was broken, the traitor was vanquished, and their story was just beginning. 6 months later, the fortress was unrecognizable. The pervasive chill was gone, replaced by a tangible warmth that seemed to emanate from the very stones. Tapestries in warm colors of gold and crimson now hung on the walls, and the ever-present fires burned bright and welcoming. The staff no longer scurried with their heads down. They smiled, their fear of their king replaced by a fierce loyalty to him and their Luna Queen. Alara stood on a balcony overlooking the central courtyard, a gentle spring breeze teasing the strands of her hair. The snows had melted, revealing patches of resilient mountain flowers pushing their way through the thawing earth. She was no longer the ghost of the scullery, she was a queen, her quiet strength and innate kindness having won over even the most skeptical of the court nobles. The sun mark on her wrist was a constant warm presence, a symbol of hope and renewal for the entire kingdom. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. Kalen's presence was a solid, comforting weight against her back. He was a changed man. The harsh lines on his face had softened, and his eyes, once so cold, were now filled with a constant, gentle light whenever he looked at her. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I was just remembering the first time I was in this courtyard," she said softly. "Shoveling snow, freezing to death." He tightened his embrace, a flicker of pain crossing his face at the memory. "A memory I would erase if I could. I almost lost you before I ever truly had you." "You didn't lose me," she said, turning in his arms to face him. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its strong, steady beat. "You found me." He captured her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "We found each other," he corrected gently. "My life was a long, cold winter, Ilara. I had forgotten what the sun felt like." Their life together had settled into a rhythm of quiet joy. They ruled side by side, his decisive strength tempered by her compassionate wisdom. They spent their evenings in the library, not with him asleep from exhaustion, but reading together by the fire, their chairs pulled close. The nightmares that had plagued him for centuries had vanished, replaced by a peaceful sleep he had never thought possible. He had saved her from a life of servitude and shame. And she, with the hidden power of life and love she never knew she possessed, had saved him from a cursed, lonely existence and a certain death. It was a mutual rescue, a perfect balancing of two souls who had been broken in different ways and were now made whole by each other. Lord Valerius rotted in the deepest cell of the dungeons, stripped of his name and power, a forgotten relic of a colder time. Leah, the young servant girl from the scullery, was now Ilara's personal attendant, her cough long gone, her face bright with happiness and devotion. Justice had been served, and a new era of warmth and prosperity had begun for the Northern Kingdom. "Come," Kalen said, pulling her gently away from the balcony. "There is something I want to show you." He led her not toward the throne room or the council chambers, but down a quiet corridor to a small, unassuming door she had never noticed before. He opened it to reveal a nursery, bathed in the soft light of the afternoon sun. A beautifully carved wooden cradle stood in the center of the room, a small, downy blanket folded neatly inside. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She walked forward, her hand tracing the smooth, polished wood. It was a room of hope, of futures, of a life she had never dared to dream of. "Our bloodline is no longer cursed," Kalen said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder as he came to stand beside her. "It is blessed. By you." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. The branded scullery maid and the cursed Frost King were gone. In their place stood a man and a woman, a king and a queen, who had faced down death and despair and chosen love. Their kingdom was safe, their future was bright, and for the first time in either of their lives, they were truly, completely home.